You know what's scary? A lot of contractors out there think that they're covered right up until the moment they actually need to use their insurance. And I'm not talking about shady fly-by-night policies either. I'm talking about contractors paying real money every month, getting certificates, landing jobs, thinking that they're protected, only to find out after a claim that there were limitations, exclusions, and coverage gaps that they didn't even know existed. And honestly, most of the time, it's not because they were trying to cut corners. It's because nobody ever explained the policy to them in plain English. So in this video, I want to walk you through some of the biggest insurance gaps I see with Texas business owners every day, especially around general liability insurance, commercial auto insurance, work comp, additional insured requirements, and one exclusion that often catches contractors off guard. If you're a contractor in Texas, or you hire subcontractors, or you sign contracts for commercial jobs, this video could save you from expensive surprises later on. One of the biggest misconceptions for a contractor I see often: if I have a policy, I'm covered. Not necessarily, because there's a massive difference between having insurance and having coverage for the thing that actually went wrong. And that gap usually comes down to exclusions or policy limitations buried deep in your policy. For example, I've seen contractors carry general liability insurance, but that classification code doesn't actually describe the actual work that they're doing. That's a problem, because if your policy says that you're a painter, but half of your revenue comes from roofing, that can create a serious claims issue. Another huge issue: subcontractors. A lot of contractors assume, well, my sub has insurance, so I'm good. Maybe, maybe not. Some policies require that you collect certificates of insurance from your subs. Some require written subcontractor agreements. Some require additional insured wording. Some policies outright exclude uninsured subcontract work. And if you don't follow those requirements, you could end up eating part of that claim yourself. And that's the stuff, honestly, that nobody talks about when they're bragging about how much cheaper their insurance policy is. Now, let's talk about one of the biggest contractor coverage traps that I see: the professional services exclusion. This is where a lot of contractors unknowingly walk into dangerous territory. Many contractors today do way more than just physical labor. They advise, they recommend, they design, they supervise, they consult. And sometimes that creates a problem. Because to be quite frank, most general liability policies are designed to cover property damage or bodily injury, not professional advice or consulting errors. So let's say a contractor recommends a certain installation method, or suggests a structural change, or tells the customer, trust me, this is the best way to do it. And then later there's damage, or a financial loss, or a failure issue. Some carriers may argue that that came from professional advice, not just construction operations. And if there's a professional service exclusion in the policy, that can become a major coverage dispute. This gets really important for design build contractors, project managers, consultants, and even specialty trades, or contractors heavily involved in planning and making recommendations. A lot of contractors think, well, I have general liability, so I'm covered for everything. But the reality is policies don't work like that. Coverage depends on how the claim happened, not just that a claim happened. And this is exactly why contractor insurance shouldn't be treated like finding the cheapest gas pump in town. All right, let's talk about additional insured endorsements, because this topic causes confusion constantly. Here's what happens. A contractor lands a job. The general contractor asks for additional insured status. The contractor sends over a certificate of insurance. Everybody moves on. Except a certificate by itself does not automatically change coverage. That's one of the biggest misunderstandings of contractor insurance. A COI, or certificate of insurance, is informational. It shows that a policy exists, but it does not rewrite the policy. It does not magically create coverage that didn't exist in the first place. And this becomes a huge issue when contracts require very specific wording. For example, primary and non-contributory wording, waiver of subrogation, completed operations, ongoing operations, scheduled additional insured endorsements. A lot of contractors assume that blanket AI status automatically satisfies every requirement. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it absolutely does not. And then a claim happens. Attorneys get involved, contracts get reviewed, And suddenly everybody's arguing whether coverage actually applies. That's why it's important for contractors to understand the difference between blanket additional insured endorsements and scheduled additional insured endorsements. One may automatically extend coverage under certain conditions. The other specifically names the entity. And depending on the project and the contract and the carrier, that distinction can matter a lot. Now, let's talk about commercial auto insurance, because this is another area where a lot of contractors accidentally cause major gaps in insurance, especially here in Texas. A lot of contractors are driving vehicles that are titled in their own personal name while using them daily for business operations. And the mistake that they make is assuming that their personal auto policy is going to cover everything. Sometimes it might, sometimes it won't. Especially once trailers, employees, tools, equipment, or heavier commercial use enter the picture. Another issue, employees using their own vehicles for business use. A lot of business owners never think about that exposure until there's a serious accident. And that's where hired and non-owned auto coverage becomes important. Because even though the company doesn't own the vehicle, the business can still get pulled into a lawsuit. And here's another thing that contractors miss. Just because a vehicle is insured doesn't mean that every driver automatically is. Driver history matters, vehicle usage matters, who owns the vehicle matters, and how it's titled matters. And unfortunately, auto claims are one of the fastest ways that small contractors get financially crushed. Now, let's talk about work comp insurance in Texas. And this is a conversation that gets misunderstood all the time. Because Texas is unique. Texas allows businesses to operate as non-subscribers, meaning technically work comp is not mandatory for many private employers. But here's the issue. A lot of contractors hear that and immediately think, cool, I don't need it, until they realize what happens after a serious injury. Because without work comp protections, employee injury lawsuits become a much bigger exposure. And construction injuries can become increasingly expensive very quickly. On top of that, many general contractors and project owners require subcontractors to also carry work comp insurance. So even though Texas law may not require it, your contract might. And if you don't carry it, you may lose jobs before you even have an opportunity to bid. Also, a lot of contractors in Texas, don't realize that work comp policies affect how claims and lawsuits are handled. There are legal protections and framework involved that non-subscriber businesses simply don't get. This isn't a fear tactic. This is about understanding actual risk. And finally, let's talk about umbrella insurance, because this is another massive misunderstanding. A lot of contractors think that umbrella insurance literally covers everything. It doesn't. Umbrella policies typically sit over everything. Umbrella policies sit over underlying policies like general liability, commercial auto, employer liability. But here's the important part. Umbrella coverage usually follows the policy form of the underlying policy. Meaning, if the underlying policy excludes coverage, the umbrella often excludes it as well. So if your general liability policy excludes professional services, your umbrella usually doesn't fix that problem. If your auto policy has a coverage problem, your umbrella may not step in. Umbrella increases limits, but it does not automatically erase exclusions. And that is a really important distinction. At the end of the day, contractor insurance isn't just about checking a box so that you can get a certificate of insurance. It's about making sure that your policy actually lines up with the type of work that you're doing. Your contracts, your vehicles, your subcontractors, your real world risk. Because price matters absolutely, but coverage gaps matter a whole lot more after a claim. And honestly, some of the most expensive policies that I've seen still had dangerous holes in them. And you haven't reviewed your insurance in a while, or you're not fully sure what exclusions actually say, it's probably worth having someone walk you through that before a claim forces you to have that conversation. If this video has helped, hit the subscribe button. We put out content every week to help Texas business owners better understand their insurance in plain English, without all the confusing jargon. And if you know of a contractor who needs to hear this, send them this video before insurance becomes an expensive lesson.